Folks, we saw an absolute crazy weekend here in week 5 of the college football season, and I'm telling you, it's just going to get better from here on out. But let's get into what we saw in week 5. Who's the contenders? Who's the pretenders? Where are we going to need to see improvement? It's just going to be absolutely bonkers as we break down the 5 thoughts on week 5 in college football. So gather around, get a drink, let's get down to it, and let's break down exactly what we saw in the week 5 edition of the college football season. Thought 1 on week 5 in college football. Well, let's start with undisputed number 1 team in the country, and that's right, it's the Ohio State Buckeyes. Not just because I got the helmet here, it is by far proven that the Buckeyes are the most complete team going in to week 6 of the college football season. That's right, they went on the road to Washington and put on an absolute defensive show. That's right, you knew Ryan Day was going to be a little bit conservative, taking his young quarterback on the road at Washington. And we knew that this defense was just going to be the main focal point of this team here on the road at Washington. And boy, was it. How about Caden Curry? Caden Curry was an absolute dominant beast on the defensive line. 11 tackles. That's right, folks, 11 tackles. He had 5 tackles for loss in the game and 3 sacks total. So that is a massive, massive performance by big number 92, Caden Curry. Julian Sand was very, very productive in this football game, especially once he got going late in the second quarter. He was 22 of 28, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and didn't make any mistakes that cost him any type of yardage or any points at all. He just played perfection. I tell you, it's amazing. But really, again, this really boils down to Ohio State and Matt Patricia on the defensive side. Washington was one of the highest rated scoring teams coming into this game, and they went 1 of 11 on third down in this football game. 1 of 11. That's right. They couldn't get any critical downs throughout the game at all. And it's just a absolute masterpiece of a defensive performance again by this Ohio State Buckeyes. And what a luxury for Ryan Day to have a defense that can bring his offense along. And speaking of offense, it is now proven known. We knew it since the second week of the season, but now we really know it after 4 games. It is Bo Jackson, the Bo Jackson experience. That's right, folks. This is the leading running back for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Donaldson is good in the tough yardage situations, but Bo Jackson by far is the number 1 tailback in the stable of tailbacks at Ohio State. So overall, this was a very impressive win for Ohio State at 24-6, going on the road, knowing what we knew going into the game, how the Big Ten has fared on the road in these games since joining the Big Ten with the West Coast teams. They're 3-13. Ohio State, again, started off slow. They had the Brandon in this fumble. That was the one mistake I think you could take away from the game. That was, we got to fix that. We can't have special teams fumbles. But overall, this was just a massive performance in a game that, quite frankly, I thought there was a decent chance that Ohio State this game could be close or potentially even lose this game. Ohio State left no doubt in anybody's mind about who is the current number 1 team. No questions asked. I don't know. The AP poll hasn't been released as recording this video, but I'll tell you, if anybody else gets a number 1 vote, and it's just cockamamie BS. So there we go. Ohio State 24, Washington 6. Thought 2 on week 5 in college football. Well, folks, let's move over to Happy Valley, and let me tell you, it wasn't so happy at the end of the second overtime when Penn State couldn't stick the ball in to tie that thing back up and get a chance to win it. They end up losing 30-24 to the Oregon Ducks. And quite frankly, it's a real shocker that they were even able to get this thing tied back up. This offense of Penn State's, I just don't buy it. Their receiving core is subpar at best. Pena's best performance in the game was the 3 runs that he had, nothing to do with the 2 catches he had. This just was not a very good performance by Penn State's offense. Both of these teams played very timid in the first half, mustering a 3-3 tie at halftime. I think both teams gave the other team's defense too much respect, truthfully and honestly, in the game. I think they should have came out more high-flying than they did, and Penn State just can't. That's the truth of the matter, is they just can't be high-flying. They're going to have to win in a defensive struggle, and the truth of the matter is, folks, they can't win that game either. So Oregon pretty much controlled the vast majority of this game until the fourth quarter. All of a sudden, Penn State gets a little momentum. The crowd might have wanted to walk out, but they stuck around, and they ended up, Drew Aller, we'll give him credit. He had one beautiful ball on that ball that he threw for the touchdown in the back of the end zone. That was a tremendous, tremendous throw. He had time. It was a 2-man route, and he took advantage of it. But overall, in the second drive that they got for the touchdown to tie the game up at 17, it was a workmanlike drive. The problem is, it just came so late. If they would have been running something other than, what they were trying to do in the first half and maybe put some of this in, and, they could have got a little bit ahead or a little bit better off and maybe won this game. But the bottom line here, this really boils down to Dante Moore. And Dak Moore, the freshman phenom wide receiver, I told you this kid was going to be something else, and he made tremendous catches in this game, critical points to get them big yardages. And Dante Moore just had too much poise, and he wasn't going to let this team, the Penn State Nittany Lions, win in their whiteout game, and he showed it in the second overtime. He just took advantage and plowed it in for the game-winning touchdown. And at the end of the day, Penn State just, again, they had a good 6-7 minute stretch in the second half of the first or the fourth quarter, but this is not a team that I can see can go on the road to play Ohio State, and I don't think they could get into a score fest with a team like Indiana either. So we're going to find out exactly where Penn State goes from here, but Oregon by far is probably the second best team in the country. I moved them down a little bit last week to number 4. From number 2, and they're going to skyrocket back up there. This was a tough road win, and they got it, even though I felt like they won the game by more than what the scoreboard says and how the game ended. I still think this is a very, very dominating Ducks team and is going to contend with Ohio State for the Big Ten. They just don't play each other, or potentially couldn't play each other until the Big Ten championship game if they both get there. So a very, very impressive win for Oregon on the road at Penn State, 30-24. And again, Drew Aller, he just is not. Anybody looking at this kid as a first-round quarterback is just absolutely bonkers. Thought 3 on Week 5 in college football. What a game we had down in Georgia, folks, where Alabama outlasted the Bulldogs 24-21. And let me tell you, I think Kirby Smart, in my opinion, and I'm just going to say it's my opinion, he made a dumb bonehead move late in this game that could have tied, well, not late in the game, but 13 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, that could have made this game a tie game, and he wanted to go for this thing and take the lead, and quite frankly, that's what cost him the game at the end of the day. But really what cost him the game throughout the game was Alabama just out-physicaled Georgia when it mattered. Georgia overall was 2-8 on third down. Now, you're not going to win football games when you're 2-8 on third down conversions, and they just didn't have the physicality when they needed it to either, stomp on Alabama's throat or at the end of the game to even get a stop to try to get the ball back. Overall, Georgia outrushed Alabama 227 to 118 yards, but Ty Simpson just had a much, much better game than Gunnar Stockton. Gunnar Stockton shows you in this game why he's not going to be able to take this team on his back and win you a game of this magnitude. Yes, I would say that he did in the Tennessee game with that, beautiful throw there to get that thing into overtime. But when push comes to shove, week after week, he's just not going to be that guy. So Georgia's got to get better play. They had that drop. Both teams had a drop. I mean, you saw Ryan Williams dropped that first touchdown. That would have been a touchdown. And you saw Georgia late in the game drop that one. That would have been a touchdown too. But really this boiled down to Alabama just, keeping, they jump out to 2 touchdown lead, 2 14-play drives to take a 14-0 lead. Georgia comes back. Boom. You think this is going to be 14-7. All right, here we go. It gets to Georgia, makes the mistake, fumbles the ball. Alabama only gets 5 yards off of that, but ends up kicking the field goal. You come back with Georgia, so now you got a 17-7. Georgia comes back, boom, and scores. So now it's 17-14. You think you got something going on here, and then they give up that drive before half. So you got Alabama driving before half. They get a touchdown, 24-14, and then they come out in the second half, drive the ball, and we get what might be the shank of the season. That's right. This kid shanked this ball. I mean, it went straight to the left. It was just a shank of all shanks. Georgia ends up getting one drive to get a touchdown to make this thing, 24-21. But then, Kirby's down there at 8-yard line, 7-yard line, somewhere in there, 4th and 1. He could have took the field goal and tied this thing up. 13 minutes or so to go in the fourth quarter. He gets greedy. He hasn't been able to really get anywhere throughout the game on these critical downs, but he tries it. He sweeps it to the right, and of course 2 Alabama defenders in that area, and one of them just brings down for the tackle for loss, and they walk away with no points. And then the rest of the game, basically, Alabama controls the ball on 2 drives, and Georgia gets it and can't score, and there we are, game over. But I really felt like Kirby should have took the 3 points in that position. He was playing from behind the whole game. Like I said, Alabama jumped up 14-0. Georgia made a comeback, made it 17-14 in terms of Alabama 17, Georgia 14. It went to 24. Well, shit, my microphone. Watch that. It went to 24-17. 24-21, and I felt like Kirby needed to get that game tied, at least tied, to make this team, get, hey, we fought for something, we're back in this, it's a 0-0 game, let's get it going. But anyways, bottom line here is Alabama just out physical Georgia when it mattered. Third downs for both teams, both sides of the ball. When Alabama needed that first down, they got it. And when Georgia needed that first down, they didn't get it. So at the end of the day here, both of these teams are really, they're strong contenders for the SEC title. I think Alabama has found a rhythm here. They need to work a little bit more in the run game. Jam Miller back is going to help, I think, throughout the season. But bottom line here is both of these teams, have a very strong possibility of getting to the SEC championship game. It's just a matter of, can they get through these schedules over the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and not take another loss if you're Georgia, and Alabama in that case too. You don't want to take a conference loss with the Florida State loss already looming over your head. So there we are. Alabama outlasts Georgia 24-21. Thought 4 on week 5 in college football. We've been concerned about the LSU offense for many, many weeks now. I just don't think it's very potent. They don't have much of a running game. The receiving core, which was supposed to be really good, has been yet to be really great. Nussmeier has been, it's the same Nussmeier. He's going to make the mistakes, throughout the game that you just can't live with. And here we are, Ole Miss defeating LSU 24-19, and Brian Kelly has really got to figure out what he's going to do with this offense, because it's just not good enough to win the games that they've got left on their schedule. And they're going to have to fix that if they're going to beat teams like Alabama and even Oklahoma at the end of the season, because this team is really struggling offensively. You got to give it up to Ole Miss. Ole Miss played a heck of a game. Trinidad Chambliss. What a game he had. 314 yards passing. He had a TD. He did have an interception, a big mistake there. But, it's bottom line at the end of the day here, when the plays needed to be made in the game, Ole Miss came up big, and LSU stumbled around. They just had too many punts in a row. They couldn't get anything going. It just looked like what we thought we've been seeing with LSU, which is just an average offense. And coming into the season, folks, I was more questioning their defense than their offense. I thought their offense was going to be really good. And I thought their defense could be really good, but it also could be a detriment. But really, at the end of the day, is the defense is pretty decent overall, and the offense is just not playing up to par. I mean, in a 24-point game to Ole Miss, you should be winning this game 27-24, 31-24, and instead you're losing 24-19. So I just don't see LSU getting, they've got one loss now. Can they get through this season without one or two more losses? And I just don't see it with the schedule, folks. I think that Ole Miss is a better football team now. They're going to have, they're undefeated. I think Alabama's a better football team now. I think Oklahoma, depending on what happens with John Mateer and their defense, is probably going to be a better football team. So it's going to be very challenging for LSU, to get through this without two more losses, which is going to put them right on the bubble of whether they're going to be able to make it to the SEC championship game, which won't happen. But can they get to the playoff with three losses if they can't get through this schedule? And I'm just really concerned they're not going to be able to get through it without two more losses at the way they're playing. So give it up to Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, he's talking shit and taking names, and he's got a really great, transfer quarterback here, kind of a surprise from Ferris State, Division II national champion last year. And what a great name in Trinidad. So, Ole Miss is looking like a real contender here. They still got to go. They got games against Georgia on the road, and it's, still got to play Mississippi State, which had a really good game against Tennessee yesterday, even though they fell short. Bottom line here is that, this SEC is a bumble-jumble mess, and we're going to not know until November how this thing's really going to shake out. Thought 5 on week 5 in college football. What an absolute banana scene we saw at Virginia on Friday night as Virginia Cavaliers break and beat the Florida State Seminoles to hand the Florida State Seminoles their first loss of the season. And man, what a shakeup this has brought to the ACC, folks. And let me tell you, it's just going to be absolute madness here over the next couple months of what's going to happen in the ACC and how this conference is going to break down. Now, again, like I said, we saw Virginia beat Florida State. We also saw Georgia Tech have to come back and barely beat Wake Forest in overtime, which again is an undefeated ACC team in Georgia Tech. You got Miami on a bye week. You got Florida State on the loss. You got the two of them now playing in Tallahassee this week. So the bottom line here is, if Florida State beats Miami this week in Tallahassee, Virginia, who has one loss, but it's to North Carolina State, but it's an out-of-conference game. It's not a conference ACC game. Virginia has a one-game up on Florida State and Miami. They could lose a game still and get, to 10-2, still control their own destiny to the ACC championship game. You got Georgia Tech over here who controls their own destiny, and these schedules, folks, these teams aren't matching up. Virginia doesn't play Georgia Tech. Miami doesn't play either of those teams. Florida State has just lost to Virginia but doesn't play Georgia Tech. So there's a lot of teams that aren't playing each other here. So the bottom line here is we could end up with a Georgia Tech and Virginia ACC championship game, and Miami and Florida State sitting on the sidelines with one loss. If that happens, what did I just say in thought number 4 is that a 3-loss LSU team might not be able to make it into the playoffs, because what if we end up with a Virginia ACC championship at 10-2, a Georgia Tech at 10-2 with their only loss coming to, let's say, Georgia and Virginia in the ACC championship game, and then you got 2 one-loss teams like Miami and Florida State sitting on the sideline. How many of these teams from the ACC are going to make the playoffs? Well, it seems to me in that scenario 3. But that means a Big Ten or an SEC teams are going to be left out that could have, 10-2 records or 9-3 records with a much tougher schedule. But this is going to be real interesting. So, and we still got some teams sitting on the sidelines like Cal. Look, I was high on Cal a couple of weeks ago. I talked about Cal and the chance that they could go win the ACC. Then they go out and lay a brutal egg against San Diego State, 34-0 last week. But then they come back and they go on the road. They travel all the way to Boston College and squeak out a win there, 27-24. And again, they don't have a very tough schedule either. So this ACC, the bottom line here, at the end of the day, this conference could really start to throw a wrench in to how many teams the Big Ten and the SEC get in based on what we see with the schedules. Now, I think the Big Ten is probably going to end up here with 2 teams with 0 or 1 loss, and 1 team with 1 loss, and 1 team with 2 losses, and then the rest of the league will probably have 3 or more. So if they have that layout there, do you get all 4 teams in and then 3 it just boils down to here, man. SEC might only get 3 teams in if they can't get more wins here throughout this. So bottom line is, this is going to be a heck of a race here in the ACC. I can't wait to see the rest of the season, even though, we call it the 3rd-tier conference against the Big Ten and the SEC, which, I guess in a way it is. But the bottom line here is, it's still going to be very, very, very important to know where these teams finish up, on how this playoff is going to work out, because I think at the end of the day, it looks to me like the way it's going to play out is someone is going to get left out of this playoff this year, and this is the last year of the 12-team format, but someone's going to get left out of this, much like Florida State got left out the last time we had the last of the 4-team format. But I really feel like someone's going to be left out here, and this could be very interesting, and it could be because of the ACC, and probably will be because of the ACC. Extra. Well, yesterday, folks, in Williams Stadium, the Wilmington Quakers fell just short to the Ohio Northern Polar Bears, 35-41. And man, 2 weeks in a row, the Quakers had the ball late in the game with the chance to tie or take the lead, and they just were unable to convert that last series into a touchdown. This case, it would have won the game. Last week, it would have tied the game. But, man, they're really playing tough. They just can't convert on that last drive. Now, I will say this. This game brought to light something I think college football needs to take a look at. So the situation is, we have 20 seconds to go in the game. The quarterback runs the ball. He gets hit. His helmet comes off. Clock stops. There's just about 20 seconds, like I said, left to go in the game. And because of the helmet coming off, the player has to exit the game because the Quakers had no timeouts to call. But they also get a 10-second runoff in that situation, which ended up taking it from 20 seconds to 10 seconds, and really, honestly, only a chance for maybe 1 or 2 plays, where before you had a chance for maybe 3 and potentially 4 plays with the 20 seconds. So I don't know that I love the rule that you lose your helmet, you have to come off for a play, and you lose 10 seconds of runoff time. I think the penalty for the player having to come off the field is enough, and I don't think the 10-second runoff really is, again, I think that's just overkill on this particular thing. How did his helmet come off? Was it ripped off? Was it pulled off? Was it hit off? Was it just not strapped tight and it fell off. I mean, I don't know what it was, but more than likely it wasn't his fault that the helmet came off. And now we're being punished double time because of the player having to come out, in this case, the quarterback, and the fact that you lose 10 seconds in critical seconds on the game. Anyways, bottom line is the Quakers fall just short. Isaac Ross, the quarterback for the Quakers, had 417-yard passing, 3 TDs. Really, really efficient game here for him. And Kai Smith led the running attack for the Quakers with 85 yards and 2 TDs, and he got banged up a couple times in the game. He could have had a bigger game if he didn't have to come out a couple times. Bottom line is the Quakers are playing really well. They just haven't been able to convert on these last series. We'll see that improve as the season goes on. Quick hitters. Well, we had Illinois, the Fighting Illini, playing the USC Trojans, and that's right, Illinois dominated this game for a good portion of the game. USC made a comeback, took the lead, but we had Luke Altmaier and the boys drive the ball down the field, kick a game-winning field goal to win this game 34-32, and cement their situation in the Big Ten as a contender again, but not so much against Indiana, where they got beat down by 50-some points. But honestly, folks, this was a pretty great game for Illinois to come back and prove themselves. And I don't think this was a tremendously terrible loss for USC, even though the national media thinks it is. I think this was a challenging game to go on the road. You're playing the late game the week before. You come back, you play one of the earliest games of the season. You'll play at 11 a.m. And it was a challenging place to go on the road to. So great job, Fighting Illini, for getting that win and getting yourself back up in the race for the Big Ten here going into the second part of the season for them with a 34-32 win over the Trojans. We had Indiana. Man, what a difference a week makes. Last week they were beating down the Illini 63-10, and this week they're barely squeaking by Iowa on the road, and that's right, they needed a squeak by to get out of Kinnick Stadium with a 20-15 win over the Hawkeyes. I thought we'd see a better offensive production out of Indiana yesterday, but Iowa's defense was able to hold them to 20 points, and quite frankly, folks, this was a closer game than the 20-15 score leads you to believe. Even though that's only a 5-point win, Iowa very well coulda, woulda, and shoulda maybe won this football game. But anyways, Indiana squeaks by, and that's what matters here. You get a win, you move on, and we'll see where they go from there. They got a trip to Oregon coming up here real soon. That'll be very interesting. Another team that squeaked by yesterday was the Tennessee Volunteers, going down to Starksville, Mississippi, and man, they ended up with an overtime victory, 41-34. Against a very, very, very improved Bulldogs team. The Bulldogs still got some very impressive games in front of them, and I think they're going to pull off an upset, but they couldn't do it yesterday against the Tennessee Volunteers. So Tennessee is moving up here in the SEC. The question is, I thought Tennessee was the second best team in the SEC. Now that Georgia lost, are they the first best team? Now I got to second guess where I'm at here with this whole SEC. So anyways, it's going to be crazy here, but Tennessee does get out of Stark Vegas in overtime. Had Notre Dame travel to an SEC school, if you want to call it that, in Arkansas, and they just put an absolute beat down on them, 56-13, folks. And let me tell you, I don't know exactly what they were thinking, but we had Notre Dame up 29 points in this game, and they're fake punting. So I think Marcus Freeman is trying to make a statement on how he's going to get his team back into playoffs. And quite frankly, I hate to say it, I'm not seeing a path here for Notre Dame to make it into playoff, especially with what we talked about with the ACC earlier and what I think is going to end up over here in the ACC with multiple one-loss teams. And Notre Dame's already got 2 losses and very well potentially may take a 3rd loss. Even if they don't, the 2 losses might be enough to keep them out, but Marcus is going to go out and make every advantage to make sure he beats down teams, spreads the score. That means going for it on 4th down in a punting situation, up 29 points in a game that was already well in hand but give it to him. He knows what he's got to do. He's got to put on a showy performance over the rest of the season. Here's one thing we know for sure. If you're going to beat the Auburn Tigers, you're going to do it in an ugly fashion. That's right, folks. Texas A&M here ends up beating Auburn yesterday 16-10. And again, much like Oklahoma the week before in Auburn, now we got Texas A&M in Auburn. You're probably going to beat Auburn this season if you're a better football team than them, but the bottom line is it's not going to be easy. They are going to make it challenging on you to beat them, and you got to give it up to Auburn for that, even though they can't get on the winning side of these tough tussles that they're playing. And I don't know if they're going to be able to for the rest of the season, but we'll find out. They still got to play Georgia and they got to play Alabama, and both of those teams are going to be in for a real challenge trying to move the ball against this Auburn defense, just like what we've seen both with with Texas A&M and Oklahoma last week. So give it up to Auburn. Even though they lost, they are not an easy out here, and I think they should be commended for that, even though they're probably not going to win a lot of these games. They are definitely going to make it challenging for these teams to beat them. Friday night, we saw a game between Arizona State and TCU. Arizona State comes back from a 17-0 deficit and takes a win here at 27-24, keeping their chances for a Big 12 championship and a playoff spot alive. Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson is just an absolute duo to be reckoned with here. You can't cover Jordan Tyson. He's the best draft eligible wide receiver in college football. I said draft eligible, folks. Don't shit your pants. But I'm telling you, this Jordan Tyson is just an absolute wrecking ball. You know he's getting the ball. The defense knows he's getting the ball. They're covering him up with everything they can, and they just can't stop him. So give Arizona State kudos on the big comeback against TCU, which is a pretty good football team, folks. And let me tell you, Arizona State is looking like the team to beat here as we move into the Big 12 meat and potatoes of the season. But BYU's looking pretty good with a big win over Colorado yesterday. And Iowa State continues to put up, sufficient wins here, beating Arizona yesterday, and Texas Tech was off yesterday, so we'll see how they come back next week and if Morton's back and how that's all going to work out. But the bottom line here is this Big 12 is getting real interesting, but I still like Sam Leavitt, Jordan Tyson, and Ronnie Brown here running the ball there at Arizona State. There you have it, folks. There's our 5 thoughts on Week 5 of the college football season. And let me tell you, what a tremendous weekend it was. We got more great games coming up next week, including that Miami at Florida State game, which is going to give us a big brighter picture, maybe not, on how the ACC is going to shake out and how that's going to affect the rest of the conferences through college football. We're going to start to see a little bit more of the group of 5, the little 6, and who's going to start making some real headway on going to be this playoff spot here. I still think it's the American Conference, whether it's Memphis, North Texas, Navy, my favorite pick here, which hasn't been super impressive yet this season, but we still got a lot of season to go for the American, and maybe even Tulane can still fight back in there. So we've got a lot of interesting football coming up next weekend. We are so excited for it. We've got the Baker's Dozen poll release coming out on Tuesday. That's right, my top 13 teams. And let me tell you, folks, I'm going to be doing a lot of this because it's going to be hard after Ohio State and Oregon and Miami to figure out exactly who the next group of teams are. And by the end of next week, that'll all change again, more than likely. So, again, another great Week 5. I hope you enjoyed it. The Weekly Predictor Show will be coming out on Thursday. We see how I did last weekend. It's probably going to be a little brutal, but we'll find out when I rack all the numbers up. And again, gather round in ALTT. We'll see you next week on the 5 thoughts on this week in college football.